We're helping people reclaim calm, and calm not as something that you optimize for. It's calm as what actually exists as our baseline beneath the noise. We're not called human doings. We're called human beings. Being is appreciating stuff in the moment without doing anything and knowing that the world will continue to go on regardless, right? Every stressful experience we have is just an opportunity for growth. If we didn't experience stress at all, we would never grow.
For more than 20 years, Dr. David Rabin has studied chronic stress, trauma, and human performance as a psychiatrist and neuroscientist, working from this core insight that touch can signal safety to the brain. He turned that lab question at the University of Pittsburgh into Apollo, the first scientifically validated wearable of its kind. Today, the Apollo technology has been studied in more than 2,000 research subjects across 17 clinical trials and now has over 150,000 users. The company has raised over $30 million in funding. And in today's episode, we are going to dive into the science, the origin story of Apollo, and where it's going. Dr. David Rabin, welcome to Reclaim. This episode of Reclaim is brought to you by Future Digital. At Future, we partner with the next generation of category-defining health brands to scale through paid media, lifecycle marketing, and performance creative. If you're building a women's health or family brand and you're looking for a growth partner who knows your category, visit Scale with Future to start the conversation. Now, let's get into it. Welcome, Dr. Dave. As I mentioned before the recording, I've been very much looking forward to this conversation, diving into your background, your research, and where you're headed with your book, and also Apollo as a company.
Well, thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here with you.
So maybe we can start from the beginning. I've dove into your story, and I think for our listeners, we have a lot of founders and builders specifically in the health space. Well, let's start with your background. What your background as a neuroscientist, as a psychiatrist, working with a specialty in the trauma-informed and PTSD, but then also how you evolved into psychedelic-assisted therapy. And that's a bigger topic, but I thought we could start with your origin story, and then we can kind of go into how you have developed Apollo.
Sure. I'll try to keep it abridged. So, anybody who wants more detail, you can read my whole origin story in my new book, A Simple Guide to Being Alive. But I came into this work because as a young child, I had very vivid dreams as a kid. And the dreams, when I was, going back to sub 10 years old, I was having dreams that were not always nightmares, but they were so vivid that I would often recall them during the day and reference them as actually things that had happened. And then someone would remind me, that thing that you thought we did together, like we never did that. And then I would instantly realize that I experienced it in a dream. And that was fascinating to me. And when I started school, I started to have more nightmares and started to feel a little bit more like, as an outsider from the group when I first started, kindergarten, first grade. And I was in a new school with new people I didn't know. And they had already been like friends already coming in from like preschool and earlier years. And so I was like the outsider and I felt it. And when I noticed that around the time I started school, my dreams started to become darker and more nightmare-like in character. And so I went to my mom as I started to become a little bit more afraid of sleep. And I asked her, what are dreams and why do we have these experiences? And, she gave me a very, I think, age appropriate answer, which was, dreams aren't real and they can't hurt you. So don't worry about them and just try to get some sleep. And that was helpful at the time for my, 7-8-year-old brain, but it made sleep not so scary. But I continued to have vivid dreams as time went on. And I realized that those dreams were not, they were still felt real. Like, even though cognitively I was being told these aren't real, my body felt them as real. And so I started to question from a very young age, maybe the adults don't know what the word real means because we're using it to describe an idea and not a feeling. And the feeling is what feels real. The idea is just an idea, and ideas are often fake or not real and made up. And so, that kind of just got my thinking brain questioning from a very young age. And I wanted to study dreams for my whole life since childhood, and I had these experiences. And as I got older and went to was in high school and college, I realized that dreams are actually very hard to study, and it's very hard to build a career studying dreams and make money. And so I had my mentors recommended to me that I pursue medicine and find my interest in what might be neuroscience and start to explore that. And so I did, and I really became fascinated by chronic stress because stress is very interesting in that it changes your dream content. So if you have a really hard day, and like for me, it was like going to school and being a new school and being picked on, and that changed my dream content. I also noticed that if I watched a scary movie before bed, it completely shifted my dream content to be more scary and frightening. And if I had more nice, fun experiences before bed, that didn't happen as much, and that stress directly impacted the meaning of these experiences I was having, which you might have had these experiences too
Yes,
with
yes.
like watching a scary movie before bed or something like that. So that became interesting to me. And I started to become fascinated by, some elite performing athletes and performers, people like Michael Jordan, these people who are kind of surfacing as like these incredible examples of human performance and adaptability and skills that were blowing people away, right? Like nobody knew that anybody could be as good at basketball as Michael Jordan until Michael Jordan, took the court and took the ball and just demonstrated to everybody that he could blow everybody's minds. And that was really interesting to me because I noticed that as I started working as a clinician and seeing more patients and started working with people who were elite performers and people who were also had severe mental illness and military veterans, for example, that a lot of these people suffered the same similar kinds of traumatic experiences, but the way that they adapted to it was very different, right? In one case, the same kind of stress can result in somebody becoming severely mentally ill and not being able to get out of bed or work a job. In another case, it drives somebody to become the best in the world. And those are very different reactions to the same kind of stressor. So I started to wonder, maybe it's not the stress itself. Maybe it's the way that we're prepared for it, the support we have after, and the way we learn to cope, adapt with it that makes a bigger difference, which actually has a lot to do with mindset. And and so we talk about that a lot in performance psychology, but it's not taught very well to the general public. And so I became fascinated with chronic stress. I started studying it in about, I think it was around 2003, 2004. And then I started seeing patients regularly around like 2000, 2010, 2011. And I did my neuroscience PhD in studying chronic stress in human cells in disorders of aging like dementia and aging blindness disorders that have no cure, to study the stress response in cells, and then realized during that 8 years of doing research on cells that I really missed working with people, and that even if we fix their cells, they could still be depressed or anxious or other issues that we are addressing with the cell fixes. And so I was like, I really wanted to go back to working with whole people. And so started working with veterans and people with severe PTSD and depression and anxiety and substance use disorders, which quickly became fascinating to me. And I realized that most of these people were just not getting better with the treatments we had available. The medications were managing symptoms and stabilizing people, but long term, people were still sick. 80%, 70% were still sick years out. They were never actually entering remission that was sustained, where their symptoms were gone for an extended period. And that was strange to me because we were just accepting as a field that like a 70% fail rate for treating PTSD or depression was acceptable. And that was not something that I was taught was acceptable in medicine. So with my neuroscience hat on, I started to think about like, what other tools do we have out there that could do a better job? And maybe our concept of the way we think about what's going on in mental illness is actually off base if most of the time our treatments are failing long term. And so that's when I discovered in 2012 some of the latest research on psychedelic assisted therapies, which were being psilocybin and MDMA at that time were being studied in modern clinical studies in the same exact treatment resistant depression and PTSD populations and substance use populations that I was working with. And people were getting better at a rate that was more than double as good as what we were seeing in the clinic with our existing treatments, with not daily dosing. It was like 1 to 3 doses of medicine and a bunch of psychotherapy over several weeks or 12 weeks. And people were getting better after the treatment. Over 50% of people were better after the treatment. And that number increased at 1 year out, which we had never seen before in the history of mental illness treatment, that people will continue to get better after the treatment had stopped. And when I saw that data, the first data came back in like 2011, 2012 was published. I saw that data and it blew my mind. And I was like, wow, like people don't even realize, I didn't realize that this was even possible to achieve in mental illness. But now we're seeing actual evidence of it in the real world. I need to like this is and when you take a psychedelic medicine on top of it, it is like in part of the way that it works is it's inducing a dream-like state, but you're awake. And we work with that in therapy, just like we work with people in hypnosis to feel safe enough to remake meaning around past traumatic events. And so as I started to learn more about this and read everything I could find, I realized that this is my opportunity now in modern psychiatry to study with neuroscience the like not just how to treat some of these people and develop actual potential cures for mental illness that we've never understood how to do before, but also that I can study dreams again with medications that induce dreamlike states. And so that brought it full circle for me. And I decided in that moment in 2012, like, I'm going to become a psychiatrist. I'm going to do this work and focus on psychedelic assisted therapy and treatment resistant mental illness, and been here ever since.
Wow. I love that you were able to find your childhood thread and experiences and bring it to a full circle from lived experience into what the industry and the market and what people need today. I'm curious if, and I don't know if there's a simple answer to this, but you mentioned that it was really the response to the chronic stress that made all the difference. And I'm curious if chronic stress is depending on time, depending on depth, depending on intensity, if it really still boils down to response, regardless of what kind of stress came about.
Yeah, there's multiple factors, right? And I think it comes down to, and part of why I wrote this book and why I called it A Simple Guide to Being Alive is because it encompasses everything that I learned in my 12 plus years of Western medical and science education following college. So like over 16 years of science education, including college, plus everything I realized I didn't know when I finished my training afterwards. And that was a lot. It was like 50% of the material I felt when I started to actually be like practice medicine in the real world independently, I realized was being not taught properly to us in training. And one of the keys that stood out was that stress is not a single thing. Stress is two things. And one of them is called distress, which is what we typically think of when we think about stress. It's stress that makes us sick. It's stress that makes us feel bad or feel bad about ourselves and feel unproductive and unmotivated. And then there's eustress, EU stress, which stands for good stress. And good stress is stress that promotes growth and development as a human being. So the difference, simple example of distress would be like watching the news or doom scrolling and surrounding yourself by tons of incoming information that you can't control, but that's constantly making you worried, right? So you can't do anything about it, but it's still there and you're still saturating yourself with it. And that is what contributes to that feeling of being out of control, too much uncertainty, too much stimulation, and leads to distress. An example of eustress would be learning to ride a bike or learning to read or learning to do math, where it's hard and it's stressful and it's not necessarily easy to grasp right away, but you put a little effort in, you push past the difficulty, and now you've mastered or learned and then eventually mastered a new skill that helps you grow and expand your capabilities as a human being, right? And so overcoming challenges in our day-to-day lives, we're not often taught where those fit in, right? And so many of us are taught culturally to ask when stress comes, we ask the wrong questions first, which is how our perspective aligns with our goal outcome. Most of us share a goal outcome of growth, but if we ask the wrong questions when stress comes, then we're actually setting ourselves up for distress rather than growth. And the example would be like you get stuck in traffic or XYZ bad, hard thing happens to you, a breakup or whatever. And the first thing that many of us ask is, why me? or what's wrong with
Yeah.
me that this happened
Yes.
to me, right? Or
Yes.
what did I do to
Yes.
deserve this? And I have this saying that I use in clinic all the time that I talk about in the book that is if you ask the wrong questions, you get the wrong answers. We will manufacture answers to questions like why me and try to fill that gap and provide an explanation of why it might be my fault that this happened, even if it's not. And and so that sets us up again to feel like there's an internally generated source of threat, which is maybe there's something wrong with me that these things are happening, or maybe it's my fault but I don't know what it is. So I'm just going to spiral on it for a while, we can't do anything about it because it make me feel bad. So the solution is to ask the right questions, which are growth mindset, growth oriented questions. And one of those questions, for example, is challenge or stress comes. You have a breakup. You have again, traffic, late for work, boss is angry at you, whatever it is, right? The right question to ask is what can I learn and how can I grow from this challenge I'm facing right now? And it destigmatizes the stress. It takes the stress, the situation, and transforms it into a growth opportunity, because every stressful experience we have isn't just an opportunity for growth. If we didn't experience stress at all, we would never grow. There'd be no growth pressure. So stress is growth pressure, which is really, really important for survival and as a human species, and for any animal. And even like the stress of like not having food around all the time teaches us how to find food, right? So like that's a perfect example from like ancient societies of how the stress of hunger drove the learning of hunting practices and gathering practices that sustained food sources despite not having the kind of food accessibility we have today. So that's one of the main things that we teach, because trauma, that we have control over our perspective. And when we experience trauma or intense hardship, or we're not supported in the past, or we're blamed for hardship that's happened to us by unsupportive parties, which is very common, right? But people say like, "What's wrong with you? You let that happen to you." We've all done it probably once or twice at least in our lives. That puts people into a victim mindset framing, which results in them being more likely when stress comes again to ask why me, or what's wrong with me that this keeps happening to me, and not ask the right questions like how can I grow and learn from this experience. And just doing that simple shift in the question we ask, and it changes the story we tell ourselves about whether or not we're an agent of power or whether we're a victim of circumstance. And when we grow, we become better at developing ease when we experience eustress, which helps us to make things easier because we're learning new skills and mastering new skills. And when we experience distress over time, we eventually develop disease, either mental, emotional, or physical. And so it's really important to be mindful of how we think about stress and our perspective of it, because again, with all the things we don't have control over in our day-to-day lives, we do have control over our perspective, and that's something we can
Yes.
change at any moment.
And for the founders who are listening, they wake up and they deal with a range of stress and challenges and decisions every day. So I would say that this is also, especially pertinent just in a day-to-day application. So maybe let's talk about what, with your experience and what led to Apollo. I think there's a couple of very interesting things with Apollo. And the current data that we found is currently has over 150,000 users, 17 clinical trials behind it, has been studied in over 2,000 subjects. Yes. And so you entered into the market at a very interesting time, right? When we moved and wearables has evolved from, only counting steps to now actually capturing the data. And then now we're in this time where it's like, well, how are we responding and what do we do with the data? And things are getting smarter and more efficient around that. So maybe tell us how Apollo started and the principle around it. And then now just kind of where the wearables market has evolved. I've certainly experimented with my things, and yeah, I'm curious to dive into your perspective on that.
Sure. Yeah, it's a very interesting time for wearable
Yes.
technology. So Apollo, which I'm wearing on my chest, that you can wear anywhere on your body, is a technology that uses sound wave vibrations that are like music, but the kind of music that comes out of a subwoofer or a stand-up double bass. It's like very low frequency bass rhythm that we discovered in the lab could actually induce similar reactions in the body as psychedelic medicines like MDMA, or like soothing touch, or
Yeah.
like that great tremendous feeling when you hear one of your favorite songs randomly come on a bad day and you instantly feel better. That was an experience that really helped our patients who were struggling with severe mental illness. And we saw that in cases where even medication had failed and therapy had failed, that people were still benefiting on their day-to-day in their day-to-day lives from getting more hugs, snuggling their pets, getting more physical touch and physical connection, and also listening to music and having more of their favorite songs around, and that could rapidly shift their energy and their mood state almost instantly, which is a universal human experience. Like, you've had that experience, right?
Yes, yes.
And so I always wondered how that worked, and we've never really had a great explanation for it. And so when I was studying um, the fear and safety learning pathways in the body as it relates to PTSD and my veteran patients, because PTSD is well known in the scientific literature to be a fear learning disorder, where you have one or multiple intense, meaningful, scary events that happen where you're often not supported afterwards, that result in you feeling afraid of the world. And hypervigilance, which is one of the major symptoms of PTSD, effectively describes that experience of never feeling safe, always checking over your shoulder for threat, never being able to like shut your eyes or let your guard down because you're always worried that nobody might be watching out for you, right? And that's the body learning fear and defaulting into a fear protective mode. And in every single study of animals and humans, even going back now to like 2012, every single study in animals and humans had shown that to fix that problem, to fix that fear learning problem, which we call extinguishing fear, like a fire extinguisher, you have to relearn safety in conjunction with the environment again. You have to learn to feel safe in your environment, in your home, or at your work, wherever you are. And that works. We know that works. We know it works in animals, and we know it works in humans, and that's the whole basis for current treatments for PTSD. But it, in humans, it requires a ton of effort and on the side of the patients, and a lot of action, engagement, behavior change to learn how to do that again. And our patients had started using wearables. They had started using wearable trackers of the Gen 1 and Gen 2 variety. Gen 1 wearable trackers are like the step trackers. Gen 2 wearable trackers are like the new Oura Rings, Fitbits, Apple Watches, Whoop, that like track tons of different biomarkers like heart rate variability and activity, etc., sleep, but they don't tell you how to fix anything. They just give you data, and then you have to figure out how to fix it on your own, and then you have to make the behavior change on your own. And you can see as I'm talking probably that there are lots of barriers along the way to the end goal, which is feeling better, which requires looking at the data, determining if the data is correct, analyzing it, and then actually making the behavior change. And it was in that gray area where most of our patients were really suffering, and they were not able to make the behavior changes and continue them, and let alone interpret and analyze the data properly that was coming from their wearables. And so many of these people are just buying these devices and spending hundreds of dollars on them or thousands of dollars on them, and then throwing them in a drawer after 6 months and being like, this isn't helpful to me. Or they would keep wearing them and have data anxiety around devices telling them, hey, I'm not like, I felt like I slept well. My device said I slept badly. So I must have slept badly. Now I'm worried about my sleep. And the devices are not 100% accurate, right? So they're giving more credibility and trust to the tracking technology that's not even lab grade tracking technology than they are their own feelings in their own body. And I started to see this as like an outsourcing of trust. And so as we were working at the university, we were studying how MDMA assisted therapy worked, which it works by amplifying safety pathways in the emotional brain, which turn out to be the same safety pathways that are activated by soothing touch and hearing your favorite song on a bad day. I thought, well, what if we could create a Gen 3 wearable device? And what if that Gen 3 wearable device could listen to the signs of what's happening in your body and interpret the data for you, process that data, and then send the right signal back to your body, in the case of Apollo, the right vibration song, that reminds your body of how to enter and sustain the state of calm or energy or focus or sleep you want to be in without you having to actually put in all the effort of analyzing the data and doing the behavior change work yourself. What if we could just do some of that for you? We can't do all of it, but we could maybe do like 50%, 60%, 70%. And so that was the audacious goal because we saw technology, as great as it was actually increasing the suffering of people that we were treating. And it was smartphones and it was wearables. And we thought, well, what if technology could reduce suffering? What if technology could be used and created with the intentional goal of healing humans more effectively and doing it for them and making healing fun and easy? And so that was kind of the mission that we started out with in 2017 when we first made the discovery of the Apollo vibrations in the lab at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. And then we started testing those in thousands of people and in these double-blind randomized placebo-controlled clinical trials, and it worked. It increased heart rate variability, it improved cognitive performance, physical recovery, it increased vagus nerve activity, and it helped reduce heart rate and breath rate and blood pressure, and people felt better and more energized, and their mood went up, and they were sleeping more deeply at night. And then we were thinking about, well, should we make this a medical device for the patients we originally created it for, or should we release it as a consumer wearable product like a Fitbit or an Oura Ring or an Apple Watch that anyone can access without requiring a prescription? And so we tested it in over 3,000 people between 2018 and 2020 before we launched the wearable product. And some of those people were us and our friends and family who don't have a mental health diagnosis or any diagnosis. And it was life changing for us. And we were sleeping better and we were recovering faster and we were able to take on all the stresses of the day and transform more of them seamlessly, effortlessly into eustress rather than distress. And we were growing because of it. And it was amazing. And it was, again, completely life changing for us. And when we saw that combined with the effect that it had on people who are actually sick and diagnosed with different illnesses, we realized that this was an incredible opportunity to release a scalable technology to the general public that anybody could access at an affordable price point. And so we launched Apollo in 2020. Now we have over 200,000 people using it since then. And we have, you mentioned 17 clinical trials, one of which showed that just came out, which is really exciting with Oura Ring, showing that people who use Apollo in as little as one night for 3 hours, just strapping it on and turning it on, you don't do anything else, will increase your sleep on average by 46 minutes in one night of use. One night of use. So that's ambient level sleep improvement with one night of use of Apollo without any drugs and without any side effects or grogginess the next day. And Apollo is also now been demonstrated in that study with Aura that just published to be the first technology to improve REM sleep as well without effort. And so this is really setting is creating a really exciting opportunity for us to rethink about the way we approach wearables and how we can use new technology to actually augment human health and human flourishing in a way that doesn't require us to work for the technology. The technology can work for us. It can be human centered, and we can leverage the power of AI like we have with Apollo to turn on it automatically, like what we do with sleep, where we can actually detect when somebody's going to wake up in the middle of the night and prevent the wake up before it happens. And that has been the most exciting flagship product that we've created called Smart Vibes that has really been tremendous for giving people over an hour of sleep back a night and improving deep and REM sleep significantly. And so there's a lot of hope out there for people who have been struggling with insomnia and mental illness that wasn't there before.
Wow. You covered a lot and you unpacked a lot there. I think there's a couple of things, and just kind of thinking about this from a creating access, from a growth and awareness. I'm wondering, with over 200,000 users, being in a new category and having to do a lot of education, because that's also what we see with a lot of health. When you're inventing a new category, you're spearheading change. How did Apollo first create that awareness to get into the hands of the users for them to allow to test? Was it more of organic? Was it more of, having strong referrals, because now I see that there's also a business channel partnership, which you also mentioned, partnering with Aura. I'm kind of curious how that is. And part of the reason why I'm asking is, so for instance, and we don't have to keep this part in, like I was experimenting with a neuropod, right? So I was at a show, I was at an event, I was able to experience it. And so I guess I'm just curious how Apollo is thinking about how they've created access and then creating awareness past and then moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think creating any new category of technology is very, very challenging, or any new category of any product, right? Like, think about and I talk about this in the book, like the greatest discoveries of humankind in the last 200 years are considered like hand washing and antibiotics, right? Two things that are incredibly deceptively simple discoveries that have revolutionized human health and human culture and extended human life by 20 to 30 years alone, right? Just those two discoveries, which is why they're considered two of the greatest discoveries in the history of humankind. And simple discoveries, hand washing, arguably the simplest discovery ever, right? Was a dramatic finding. And yet
Yeah.
both of these discoveries, new categories of thought, antisepsis with hand washing, antibiotics with Alexander Fleming's discovery of penicillin in the 1920s, were both ignored and in some ways ridiculed before they were accepted and adopted at mass scale and recognized, and the benefits were recognized to be game changing for humanity. And so we are, creating tools, that are in that same vein of how do we shift the paradigm of the way we think about health, and how do we shift the paradigm around the way that we think about um, the healing process and what role we play in it and how much control we can have over it and how technology can serve us to that end, right? And a lot of technology to date has been created to commoditize attention and to keep you engaged and to notify you with these really annoying notifications that are actually literally designed to stress you out, to capture your attention. That is technology that is designed not to serve us, but for us to serve it, our product, which is attention, right? And our attention has become the commodity that all these companies are vying for. And what we're trying to do and what we have done is created a product that gives you control back over your attention. We're not asking you to look at the app. You don't even have to look at the app except to set it up. We're not asking you to we don't have a screen on the device. Everything's about just being in the moment and creating presence focused technology that allows us to be more effective human beings and spend less time stuck in that human doing mode that leads to burnout and disease. And and so I think a lot of the education is hard. And that was actually in large part why I wrote this book, because we tried and we had a decent amount of success doing traditional marketing communications. You can see success when lots of other companies in the vagal nervous system space, or all of them, scrape the copy from our website and put it on their websites, right? So then our language is obviously resonating with people. But that was a big motivator for me to write this book, because I realized how poorly taught this information is, and how so many of us are kind of like living in what I call the human zoo, where we don't realize that we are effectively, because of the chronic stress of modern life and the overstimulation from smartphones, which, by the way, when you look at your smartphone for the first 30 minutes of every day, you're intaking as many social cues as the average human being took in a week of being alive in the 1950s. Multiply that times how many half hours of smartphone screen time you get every day. It's like weeks of social input within one day. And we were just not evolved. Humans did not evolve to take on that much incoming information to have to make decisions about. It's too much. It's not something we were designed for. And so it calls into question this concept of like, did we accidentally design a habitat that is not conducive to human flourishing, right? Because that's what makes some people money. Maybe, right? Maybe there's certain perverse incentives here that we're ignoring, because we all need money to live. We consider it like a necessary evil, but earning money activates the same parts of the brain as cocaine. So does that mean that we are addicted to making money to the point where we ignore our own human health? Kind of. That's what the behavior shows. Like we take care of ourselves last because we don't want to spend money on it. Right. And so like we'll wait to the bitter end to go to the hospital or to go get care. And that's a huge problem. It's like this cultural, societal issue where the way we heal and the way we think about health is completely mistaught. We don't teach anything about the neurological significance of safety learning, which is actually something we've known about for over 100 years in neuroscience. We don't teach about how fear learning and how earning money or using certain kinds of drugs distorts thinking and distorts self perception, and how trauma feeds into that and leads to addiction. Like we learn about some of that stuff in advanced psychiatry care and psychology, but most of that doesn't get passed down. And so when I saw that even with all this incredible explanation of the science that we had publicly on our website, people were still confused. I realized that, I had to like put this together in a more comprehensive book form that really helps to explain this as a story to people that makes it's a lot more relatable and makes a lot more sense and can be consumed kind of on an extended basis as like, here's your roadmap to life, right? Like, here's what you actually need to understand that science is showing from last 100+ years of research actually matters about being a human being, not necessarily what we were taught, but what science actually shows is very different. That seems to have a pretty significant impact on people's understanding and an integration of this knowledge. But we really need a revamping of the entire education system or a software update of the education system and our nervous systems to be able to, take in the constant barrage of information we're facing right now because we weren't trained for it. We were never taught how to do it. Well, it's not your fault that your body's adapting the way it is. It's just doing its best, and you're not, the moral is you're not broken. Like your body's just doing its best without being properly taught how to function. And so let's pause at this age of abundance that we're in right now, where we're living in literally the most convenient, most comfortable time in the history of human existence. And this is truly an age of abundance, as Stephen Kotler and Peter Diamandis have described, right? Like we should pause and just survey what we've created and take stock and
Yeah.
remember that, you know, there are certain things that are going really well in terms of our comfort and convenience. There are other things that are not going so well, like substance abuse and mental illness skyrocketing and chronic illness skyrocketing every single year. And we have an opportunity to pause and go back and reevaluate what we're doing and to think about, or this habitat crisis that we have created for ourselves to some extent, and think about how we can curate the environment more intentionally, more thoughtfully, more effectively to actually serve us based on the neurobiology of how humans were designed to function and animals, because we're all part of the same earth, and
Yeah.
and that can make a huge difference. We just keep going and going and going. But I
Yes.
think the science is really emphasizing that breaks and pauses to self reflect are really, really important. And, that gives us an opportunity to take stock of what we have and what we still need to do to improve our quality of life on earth.
Yeah. And it's very exciting to see technology like Apollo continue to evolve, continue to partner to be able to create this kind of access and to have this kind of option for people because I mean you're right, it's so necessary. All right. Well, last word to wrap up. The reason why we call it this podcast, we named it Reclaim, is because we are helping users reclaim, aspects of their health and their well-being. So if you just had to summarize what you're helping your users, your patients, your customers reclaim through Apollo, through knowledge of reading your book, what would you say that is?
I mean, simply put, we're helping people reclaim calm, and calm not as something that you optimize for. It's calm as what actually exists as our baseline beneath the noise. That it's really that is our baseline state, is calm and stillness. It's not all the other noisy stuff that we were taught to pay attention to. I think the most beautiful thing about what science is demonstrating, on one side, is that we are incredibly adaptable. We are capable as human beings of so much more in the life that we are blessed with on this earth than we are taught. and that we have tremendous ability to adapt to any number of different kinds of stressors or challenges we face. And our growth is potentially unknown, what we can do in this life and what we can accomplish. And I think that, you know, one of the things that's going to be a main driver of that, that allows us to come back to accessing our full potential, to come back to a more disease-free state of being as humans and a net zero trauma world, is to stop treating boredom and stillness like diseases, and start to remember that stillness is the baseline state of existence that we are all born knowing how to connect with and knowing how to appreciate, but we haven't practiced it and oftentimes weren't taught that it is a good thing to appreciate stillness. And stillness is like the original, I talk about this in the book, it's like the original operating system of humanity. And instead, now we have focused so much, that's why we're called human beings. We're not called human doings, we're called human beings. Being is appreciating stillness in the moment without doing anything and knowing that the world will continue to go on regardless, right? And instead we get sucked into this productivity mindset. If I'm not producing, if I'm not generating wealth, if I'm not doing XYZ thing, if I'm not overthinking things and thinking about the future all the time, and improving, then who am I? Right? And who you are is you, calm, just existing, right? Like, you don't need to do anything to be, you don't need to do anything to exist, and you don't need to do anything to reclaim calm other than get out of your own way. And I think that the techniques that we are creating now and discovering through neuroscience allow us to kind of, on the book side, restore the understanding and the memory of what it means to be in that state, and that it's not about optimizing for calm as if it's a new thing. It's remembering how to get back to where we came from, because we've all been there as children. It's something that's stored deeply inside each of our nervous systems. And then Apollo is a tool that, for those who struggle with that still, a way to feel that again. Because when you feel it, your body and your nervous system remember it immediately, and then you can have an easier time getting back into it. And it's the combination of the bottom up learning from the body through experience and the top down learning from words, language, books, and the brain cognition together that helps create long lasting understanding that sticks with us for life, and doesn't just fade away over a few weeks like memorization. We really want, when you spend effort learning something, you want to understand it in your bones and you want it to stick around. And that's a bottom up, body first, and a top down thing. And the body learns as well. And that's another thing that when we start to appreciate it, we start to make learning a lot more fun and easy for everyone.
Yeah, I love that. I actually tell this to my son all the time. When he says he's bored, he sees that as a problem. And so one of the first things that that my response is, well, bored isn't a bad thing, but we do have to go deeper, because I could see it just being a prevalent concern or issue, right? So, well, thank you. This has been a fantastic conversation. I learned a lot, and there's a lot here for our listeners to dive into as well.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
One more thing. Reclaim reaches founders, operators, and investors, building the future of health and wellness. If your brand wants to be in front of this audience, sponsorship slots are opening up. Reach out at support@scalewithfuture.com. The link is in the show notes.